What if thousands of tons of spoiled watermelons were buried beneath the dry soil of the Sahel? At first it sounds insane, but the most important thing is not the fruit. It is the hidden system under its soil that cannot hold water farmers who cannot survive a failed season in a country trying to turn organic waste into fertility. This video is not claiming Ibrahim Traoré has done this. It asks a bigger question. If a project like this ever happened, would spoiled fruit become compost? Compost rebuild moisture, and moisture help stabilize food production. Or would it become a rotting disaster captured by insiders before it ever reaches the farmer? Do not look at the watermelon. Look at the soil access in proof. At first, the scenario sounds like a rumor designed to make people argue. Trucks full of spoiled watermelons moving toward the dry edge of the Sahel. Workers cutting pits into hard ground. Fruit that once belonged in a market being buried beneath soil that struggles to hold moisture. The image is strange enough to make anyone stop and ask, is this development or theater? That is exactly why the scenario needs to be handled carefully. This video is not claiming that Ibrahim Traoré has officially launched a project to bury thousands of tons of watermelons in the Sahel. It is asking a what-if question. If a government ever tried to turn spoiled fruit and organic waste into a tool for restoring degraded land, what would actually have to change for that idea to matter? On paper, the promise sounds simple. Take what is already being wasted, spoiled watermelons, damaged produce from transport, crop residues after harvest, organic waste from markets, then turn that material into compost soil amendment or controlled organic input. Use it to rebuild tired soil. Help that soil hold water longer after rain. Give farmers a cheaper local input. Reduce crop failure. Support food production close to villages and towns. That is the promise. But promise is not proof. Proof would have to appear in numbers that farmers and families can feel. Does treated soil hold more moisture than untreated soil? Do seedlings survive longer when the first rains stop? Do farmers spend less on fertilizer or soil inputs? Does the treated land produce more vegetables, grains, or fodder? Do local markets receive steadier food supply? Do prices become less violent for families buying tomatoes, onions, maize, or vegetables? And does the waste system reduce public health problems instead of creating new ones? Those are the first tests. The anchor is not the exact number alone. Thousands of tons sounds dramatic, but volume can deceive people. 1,000 tons of badly managed fruit can become 1,000 tons of odor insects in wasted labor. A smaller amount processed correctly, placed correctly, and measured honestly could teach farmers more than a giant symbolic dumping operation. So the scale matters only after the method is proven. First comes the pilot, then the soil test, then the farmer result, then the cost calculation. Only after that should anyone talk about expansion. That is how promise becomes proof. Because the goal cannot be to bury fruit and hope the desert turns green. That would be fantasy. The goal would have to be a controlled waste-to-soil system. The watermelons would not be the solution by themselves. They would be one ingredient inside a wider chain, sorting, composting, mixing, testing, transporting, applying, monitoring, and training. That chain matters more than the fruit. A watermelon is wet, sugary, and easy to rot. Used badly, it can create smell, pests, methane, disease, risk, and public anger. Used carefully as spoiled produce mixed with dry carbon material manure, leaves straw, crop residues, or biochar, it could become part of a soil restoration experiment. That distinction is the moral line of the entire story. Good food should not be buried while families struggle with prices. But spoiled food and organic waste should not automatically become trash either. If waste can become fertility, then the real question becomes much bigger. Can Burkina Faso build a local system that turns decay into productive value? Can that system reach farmers before it is captured by contracts, politics, and showpiece projects? And can the proof be measured in soil harvests and prices, not just in dramatic footage? This is where the scenario becomes analytical, not promotional. The promise is waste becomes fertility. The proof is whether fertility becomes cheaper food, stronger farms, and better soil. A policy becomes real only when ordinary people feel the change. For this scenario, the first real proof would not be a viral image. It would be soil that stays moist longer, crops that survive longer, farmers who spend less, markets that receive food more predictably, and a public system that turns waste into value before insiders turn it into another gate. The hidden system behind this strange idea is not watermelon. It is soil. More specifically, it is the ability of soil to hold water, hold nutrients, and hold life. That is the system people often miss when they talk about the Sahel. The surface story is usually water, more rain, more wells, more pumps, more dams, more canals. And water does matter. But water only becomes useful when the land can keep it long enough for roots to use it. Dead or degraded soil cannot do that well. It becomes hard. It loses organic matter. It loses structure. It loses microbial life. It loses the tiny spaces that allow water to sink in and stay. When rain finally arrives, water can run across the surface instead of entering the ground. When heat returns, the moisture that remains disappears quickly. When wind rises, the best layer of soil can leave with it. So the real problem is not only that the Sahel needs water. The deeper problem is that large areas need soil that can receive water, store water, and turn water into growth. That is where organic matter becomes strategic. In a dry climate, soil is not simply dirt. It is infrastructure. It is storage. It is a living reservoir. A road moves goods. A warehouse stores harvests. A grid moves electricity. Healthy soil stores moisture, nutrients, carbon, and biological life. When that storage collapses, farmers are forced to fight the season with weaker tools. Organic matter does not look powerful on camera. It does not have the drama of bulldozers. It does not create the same shock as a giant canal. It does not look like sovereignty in the way a mine, a road, or a military parade might look like sovereignty. But inside the ground, organic matter can decide whether a seed survives. It feeds microbes. It improves soil structure. It helps the ground absorb water. It can reduce crusting on the surface. It can help roots expand. It can support seedlings during the fragile days after rain stops. That is why the watermelon image matters only as a doorway. Spoiled watermelon contains moisture, sugars, and organic material. But it is not irrigation. It is not fertilizer by magic. It is not a shortcut to greening the Sahel. Alone, it can become rot. Mixed and managed properly, it could become one ingredient in a larger compost system. The real formula would not be watermelon plus sand equals green land. That is the cartoon version. The real formula is slower and less flashy. The real formula would be organic waste plus dry matter plus microbial decomposition plus soil testing plus farmer training plus water harvesting. That is a system. And in agriculture, systems beat symbols. Think of a farmer after the first rain. The field looks hopeful for a moment. Seeds are in the ground. The air changes. Green shoots appear. But then the rain pauses. The sun hardens the surface. The soil loses moisture. The young plants begin to fail before they ever become food. That is the point where hidden systems matter. A small improvement in moisture retention can change the outcome. A healthier patch of soil can keep a seedling alive a little longer. A composted planting pit can become a small island of fertility. Traditional restoration methods already point in this direction. Small pits can collect water. Half-moon earthworks can slow runoff. Mulch can protect the surface. Trees can shield soil from wind. Manure and compost can return carbon. Biochar can help retain nutrients when used correctly. None of these tools is magic alone, but together they turn land restoration into a repeatable system. A village that repeats that method across many plots can slowly change its food risk. This is why the topic is not absurd when framed correctly. The absurd version says, bury fruit and water the desert. The serious version says, use local organic waste to rebuild soil function. Then measure whether farmers gain a real advantage. The proof would be practical. More water infiltrates. Less water runs off. Soil holds moisture longer. Seedlings survive more often. Farmers need fewer external inputs. Local food supply becomes less fragile. You do not measure soil sovereignty by slogans. You measure it by whether the land wastes less water, loses less fertility, supports stronger roots, and leaves more value with farmers. But once fertility becomes valuable, the next question appears immediately. Who receives that fertility first? Because soil improvement is not only a technical issue, it is also an economic issue. A farmer with better soil buys fewer emergency inputs. A village with better soil loses fewer planting seasons. A country with better soil has a stronger foundation for food sovereignty. It is also an access issue. Once the hidden system is clear, the next question is allocation. Who gets access first? That is where many development plans succeed or fail quietly. Allocation is the part of policy most people do not see. It is also the part that decides whether a national idea becomes public value or private advantage. Not in the announcement, not in the ceremony, not even in the first pilot plot. They succeed or fail when resources are distributed. In this scenario, the resource is not only spoiled watermelon. The resource is fertility, compost, soil amendment, training, transport, tools, water harvesting support, selection for pilot zones, access to the first proof. Imagine the system begins. Market waste is collected. Spoiled produce is sorted. Compost centers are built. Agronomists identify degraded soils. Officials announce village pilots. Trucks begin moving material across dry roads. From the air, it looks like a national plan. On the ground, every movement is a decision. Which market gets a collection point? Which district receives a compost center? Which village gets the first delivery? Which farmer group is trained? Which crops are selected? Which contractor is paid to move the waste? Which local official signs the list? Which community is told to wait? Good allocation would send the first support to the bottlenecks that matter most. Degraded food-growing zones where soil can improve quickly. Small farmers whose harvests affect local markets. Women growers who produce vegetables near villages. Cooperatives that can repeat the method after the pilot ends. Nurseries that can raise seedlings for wider restoration. Market gardens close enough to feed towns. Area where compost can be paired with rainwater harvesting mulch, zai pits, half moons, or small irrigation. That kind of allocation has a logic. It would also protect the project from the accusation that it is only spectacle. When the poorest soils, the most exposed farmers, and the most food-relevant zones receive early support, the project can prove that it is solving a bottleneck rather than creating a headline. It asks where a small amount of fertility can unlock the largest public benefit. Not the loudest headline, not the most visible field, not the farm with the strongest political connection. The project is strongest when it funds the bottleneck. But dangerous allocation would look very different. The compost goes to large farms first. Demonstration plots are chosen because cameras can reach them. Transport contracts go to insiders. Villages are selected through relationships, not soil need. The poorest farmers hear the speech, but never receive the material. Women growers are praised in the language of the program, but excluded from the delivery schedule. And the project creates the appearance of rural transformation, while the real value moves through a narrow pipeline. That is how a soil program can fail without looking like failure. A plan can be called national while operating through a very narrow circle. It can speak the language of farmers while serving contractors. It can use the language of sovereignty while creating dependency on political access. The field shown on television may look green. The opening ceremony may look organized. The trucks may look impressive. But the farmer who needed the compost at planting time may still be waiting. This is why the human question matters. A small farmer does not need a viral experiment. He needs soil that holds moisture long enough for his crop to survive. A woman growing vegetables near a village does not need a slogan about innovation. She needs safe compost, clear instructions, water, nearby seeds matched to the season, and a market where she can sell without being crushed by transport costs. A young worker does not need a speech about waste. She needs a compost center that pays wages, trains skills, and remains open after the cameras leave. If the waste-to-soil system reaches people like that, the idea becomes serious. If it does not, the watermelon remains only a headline. So the allocation test must be public from the start. Where is the map? What are the criteria? Which villages are selected first? Why those villages? How much material does each receive? Who manages delivery? What results are expected? What happens if the results fail? And who can appeal if a village believes it was skipped unfairly? Good policy does not bury the strangest fruit. It removes the bottleneck that keeps farmers poor. And in this case, the bottleneck is not only degraded soil, it is also information. It is timing. It is the right input arriving before the planting window closes. It is the ability of small producers to receive support without begging for access. It is access to fertility, because fertility can become power. And once fertility becomes power, someone will try to control the gate. This is where the entire story turns. The same waste that could rebuild soil could also become a pipeline for capture. That is why the key phrase is simple: transparency versus capture. In the transparent future, the system is public enough for farmers to trust it. Spoiled fruit is collected through clear rules. Market waste is separated from plastic, metal, and chemical contamination. Compost sites are mapped. Soil data is published before the project begins. Villages understand why one zone is selected before another. Farmers receive training before the material arrives. Delivery lists are visible. Compost quality is tested. Costs are explained. And the results are measured openly: moisture retention, seedling survival, crop yield, fertilizer savings, local jobs, and food price stability. That does not make the project perfect. It simply makes the project visible enough to correct, but it makes the project testable. Supporters can point to evidence. Critics can challenge evidence. Farmers can say whether the system helped or failed. That is the first future. A public pipeline. It may be slower. It may be less dramatic, but it gives citizens something precious: the ability to see whether the project is working before the next round of money is spent. Now imagine the second future. The cameras show trucks crossing dry land. The music sounds heroic. The speeches talk about self-reliance. The headline says, "Waste is becoming fertility." But behind the image, contracts are hidden. Transport costs rise without explanation. Compost centers appear where political visibility matters more than soil need. Quality tests are missing. Selected farms are connected to people near power. Villages receive promises while insiders receive payments. The public sees fruit. The insiders see contracts. That is the second future, a private pipeline. And that is why this topic cannot be judged only by whether the idea is strange. The real question is, who controls the chain? Collection, transport, storage, composting, testing, distribution, training, monitoring. Every link can create value. Every link can also be captured. Capture may not look dramatic. It may look like a small transport contract, a storage contract, a compost center contract, a list of approved farmers, a pilot field that was already productive, a soil test that is never published, a project report that counts trucks instead of crop survival. That is how national plans become gates. The gate is not always a wall. Sometimes it is a spreadsheet nobody sees. Sometimes it is a procurement rule nobody understands. Sometimes it is a village list released after the decision has already been made. Not always through open theft, sometimes through silence, sometimes through missing data, sometimes through criteria nobody can see, sometimes through public language that hides private access. A strange idea needs boring rules. Public maps, open criteria, transparent procurement, compost standards, farmer feedback, independent inspection, cost disclosure, visible delivery schedules, and results that can be compared with untreated land. That comparison is crucial. A pilot field can look successful simply because it was already better than surrounding land. A true test compares similar plots, similar crops, similar rainfall, and similar labor. Without comparison, the public sees only theater. Without those rules, the watermelon becomes a distraction. People argue about whether the fruit is ridiculous, while the real question disappears. Who owns the pipeline? Who receives the fertility? Who earns from the movement of waste? Who decides which village is first? And who remains beside exhausted land watching the trucks pass by? The same organic waste that can rebuild dead soil can also become another gate around rural opportunity. So the test is not whether the image shocks people. The test is whether the system stays public enough for farmers to trust it, repeat it, and benefit from it. A serious soil program cannot survive on slogans. It needs mechanisms. Not one drone shot, not one speech beside a pile of fruit, not one pilot field that looks green for a few weeks. Mechanisms are the difference between a strange experiment and a working national system. They also protect leaders from their own supporters. Supporters often want quick proof. They want the image to be true because the image feels inspiring. But real development must survive measurement, not applause. The first mechanism is a public soil scorecard. Before any compost is applied, each selected zone needs baseline data. How much organic matter is in the soil? How fast does water disappear after rain? How hard is the surface? What crops are being tested? What is the expected improvement? After treatment, the same indicators must be measured again. If moisture retention does not improve, the project has not proven itself. If crop survival does not improve, the project has not proven itself. If farmers cannot see the difference, the project has not proven itself. The second mechanism is independent approval. Who decides where the waste goes? A political office, a technical team, a local committee, a farmer cooperative. The strongest model would combine technical soil need with local participation. Agronomists can identify soil problems. Farmers can identify practical constraints. Local committees can verify whether the material reached the right people. Without that balance, the program can become either too political or too detached from reality. The third mechanism is procurement discipline. Who collects the waste? Who transports it? Who builds compost centers? Who supplies tools? Who is paid for storage? Those contracts must be visible enough to prevent inflated costs and insider access. Because a project can fail financially even when the agronomy is promising. If moving spoiled fruit costs more than the value it creates, the model cannot scale. The fourth mechanism is compost quality control. Spoiled watermelon is risky when handled badly. It must be mixed with dry carbon material. It must be aerated. It must be monitored. It must be processed long enough to reduce odor pest contamination and disease risk. If it reaches farms before it is safe, it is not compost. It is rot with a development label. The fifth mechanism is return discipline. This is where the project must face economics, not only agronomy. Does the treatment reduce farmer risk? Does it lower input costs? Does it increase yield enough to justify labor? Does it help food reach markets more reliably? Can farmers repeat the method using local materials after the pilot ends? A system that only works when officials' trucks and cameras are present is not sovereignty. It is performance. The sixth mechanism is an audit trigger. If compost fails quality tests, distribution stops. If transport costs rise, the cause is reviewed. If selected farms are tied to insiders, the list is challenged. If smell pests or health risks appear, the design changes. The seventh mechanism is public learning. Every failed pilot should teach the next pilot. Every successful plot should be studied for why it worked. Was it the compost, the soil type, the rainfall, the farmer training, the crop selection, the timing? Without learning, the same mistake can be repeated at national scale. This is where criticism becomes useful. Critics may say burying fruit is wasteful. They may say the money should go to wells, storage, irrigation, or roads. Those concerns should not be dismissed. They should become part of the measurement. The fair test is not whether the idea sounds patriotic. The fair test is whether it improves soil, lowers farmer risk, reduces waste, and helps food reach markets more reliably. Judge the project by soil tests, crop survival, farmer cost, compost quality, and food prices. Not by the shock of the image, because once the fruit is buried, the headline is over. The camera cannot prove fertility. Only the next season can. What remains is measurable fertility, trusted rules, and farmers who can repeat the process themselves. If this system worked, ordinary people would not feel it first inside a ministry. They would feel it in the market. A mother buying tomatoes would not care whether the original idea sounded strange. She would care whether prices stopped jumping every week. A market gardener would not care whether the internet laughed at buried watermelons. He would care whether his soil holds moisture long enough for seedlings to survive after the rain stops. A truck driver would not care about speeches on soil sovereignty. He would care whether there is regular produce to move from village farms to town markets. A young worker would not care about a ceremonial pilot site. She would care whether compost centers, nurseries, storage points, and small processing sites create jobs close to home. That is where the real value of a waste-to-soil system would appear, not in the fruit. In predictable fertility. The ordinary life chain is simple. Waste is collected instead of dumped. Compost is processed instead of left to rot. Soil improves instead of hardening after every dry season. Farmers plant with less fear. Crops survive more often. Trucks carry produce more regularly. Markets receive food with less interruption. Families face less price shock. That is the chain that matters. It is not dramatic, but it is the kind of chain that changes daily life. And it connects directly to the wider economy. If vegetables become more predictable, small sellers can plan better. If fodder crops survive longer, herders feel less pressure. If compost centers operate locally, rural jobs appear around sorting, mixing, loading, testing, and delivery. If soil improves near villages, young people see farming as a system with potential, not only a gamble against weather. There is also a credit angle. When farmers produce more predictably, lenders trust them more. When local supply becomes steadier, small processors can plan. When processors can plan, packaging, storage, transport, and repair businesses become more viable. So soil fertility is not only an environmental issue, it can become a local business condition. This is also where the United States and Europe offer a useful mirror. Rich countries waste enormous amounts of food, then spend money on composting biogas, soil health, and regenerative agriculture to repair damage created by wasteful systems. The Sahel cannot afford to copy the waste. It should only study the lesson. Organic material becomes valuable only when it is collected, processed, tested, delivered, and used inside a working chain. Without that chain, it becomes smell pests, emissions, contamination, and political complaints. With that chain, it can become local input. And that matters because food prices are not only created in fields, they are created through timing, transport, storage, waste energy, and trust. When tomatoes arrive all at once and rot, prices crash for farmers. When they disappear a few weeks later, prices punish families. Better soil cannot solve all of that, but it can reduce one part of the instability. This is the difference between trash and throughput. The real revolution is not burying watermelon. It is predictable fertility. Waste moves. Compost forms. Soil improves. Farmers plant. Trucks move. Markets sell. Families buy. Prices become less violent. And villages begin to see food production as something that can be strengthened from below, not only rescued from above. That is when a strange idea becomes serious. Not when officials say it is serious, not when critics mock it, but when households, farmers, workers, drivers, and market sellers can point to the practical difference. When ordinary people can touch the result, when the benefit appears in food supply, local work, lower risk, and a little more confidence before the next dry season begins. So what is really hidden behind the watermelon? Not a miracle, not a joke. Not a secret plan to make fruit water the desert. The hidden issue is whether Burkina Faso can turn local waste into local capacity. That meaning has 3 layers. Each layer matters because each one moves the idea away from spectacle and toward a working national system. The first layer is economics. If organic waste becomes safe soil input, farmers may spend less on expensive external inputs and keep more value close to home. Compost centers can create rural work. Local tools, transport, testing, and training can become part of a small but real agricultural economy. The second layer is supply chain. If soil holds moisture longer, crops become more predictable. If crops become more predictable, storage, transport, processing, and market supply become stronger. If markets receive food more regularly, families feel less pressure from sudden price jumps. The third layer is stability. When food is uncertain, rural life becomes fragile. When soil improves, farmers gain time. When farmers gain time, villages gain confidence. When villages gain confidence, migration pressure, market stress, and dependence on emergency imports can begin to ease. But none of that happens because the image is shocking. It happens only if the system is real. Public criteria, safe compost, measured soil, fair distribution, transparent contracts, farmer training, repeatable methods, and proof after the next dry season. That is the final test. Not one green patch, not one inspiring report, not one truck convoy. A repeatable system that ordinary farmers can use without waiting for permission. The real question is not whether Traore can shock the internet with watermelons in the Sahel. The real question is whether Burkina Faso can build a working fertility system where waste becomes value, soil holds water, farmers receive fair access, and ordinary people feel the difference in prices, jobs, and food security. If the project is done badly, it becomes rot. If it is done carefully, it could become one small piece of a larger soil restoration strategy. The watermelon is the headline. The soil is the story. And the system is the test. Because the future of food will not be decided by the strangest image, but by whether damaged land can become productive again, safely, fairly locally, and at scale. And the open question is this: who will own the fertility of the Sahel? Citizens through transparency or insiders through silence? Comment your country below. Would you call this idea genius, wasteful, or dangerous? And subscribe for more documentary-style breakdowns on Africa's agriculture sovereignty and economic future. Disclaimer: this video is fictional storytelling created for education, commentary, and entertainment. It is not a factual report or official information. Any similarities to real events are coincidental. Please enjoy it as creative content only.